Failure is almost always a key component on the road to success. How you react and respond to failure will dictate whether success is ultimately achieved. And remember the process. First, you have to try to succeed or accomplish something. Second, when you fail, reflect and strive to understand why you were unsuccessful and make sure you learn something from the experience that will increase your future odds of success. And third, keep trying. Keep trying until you achieve success. Overcoming failure builds patience, perseverance, and character, making success all the more meaningful. Hello again. Welcome to The Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, I share opinions, thoughts, truths on a wide variety of topics based on what I believe to be a unique life experience. And you can read more about that in the profile, the notes, and the bio. My intent is to share stories and hopefully provide some life and career lessons that will assist you in your journey. Please follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5 and subscribe to the YouTube channel Ruthless Truth. General format, I'll share some initial commentary or current thoughts on news today. Then I'll have a deeper discussion on one topic, which will be today's truth. And then I'd like to end with an American history fun fact. Okay, first thing, I need to correct an erroneous statement I made last week. And it was actually pointed out to me by one of my listeners, so thank you. So in episode 31, I was talking about economic strategies for attending college. And I mentioned the option of first attending a community college or junior college before transferring to a four-year school. And I cited Barack Obama as an example. However, I misspoke. Because after attending 4 years at Occidental College, Obama transferred to Columbia University, not Harvard, as I previously stated. He actually attended Harvard Law School. So I just want to clear that up because I strive to be factual and accurate. Okay, let's continue. So, wow, what a week of violence in the world. U.S. military killed in an ambush in Syria, an anti-Semitic attack on the eve of Hanukkah in Australia, leaving 15 dead and several wounded. There was a campus shooting at Brown University where 2 students perished. And finally, the horrific stabbing murder of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle, in their home in Los Angeles, allegedly at the hands of their own son. Now, I've heard a few people ask, well, who's Rob Reiner? And I'm like, what? Who is Rob Reiner? I guess I'm dating myself because he is one of the most iconic figures in Hollywood over the past 50 years. He was an Emmy Award-winning actor, a screenwriter, producer, and most impressively, an award-winning director, including directing 3 of my personal all-time favorite films, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and The American President. And he was also an outspoken political activist. I'm saddened by all these events, and I extend condolences, thoughts, and prayers to all those affected, directly and indirectly. And I know there has always been hate in the world. Since the beginning of mankind. So it's not shocking that we see acts of violence driven by hate. So the question, is there actually more hate today than in recent years? Or is there just more reporting and coverage of it? Well, unfortunately, the answer is yes. There is more hate in the world, both expressed and reported. Okay, so if there actually is more hate, well then why? Why now? What are the factors? Well, social scientists agree on at least a few key factors. Isolation. Now, fueled by the pandemic and lockdowns, people spent significantly more time at home and online, increasing their exposure to extremist views, which leads to factor number 2, social media. And it's not that social media creates hate, but the platforms facilitate the rapid spread of hate, conspiracy theories, disinformation. Basically, it just makes it more convenient and easier to spread hate. Another factor is political polarization, and this is definitely true in the United States. Because regardless of your political affiliation, it's impossible to deny that the political environment hasn't been this toxic, this active and hateful since the 1960s. And the climate of incivility is something we've never seen, where our legislators and political leaders regularly engage in personal attacks and violent rhetoric. And while you can't blame it all on the president, there's no doubt he set the tone and has normalized the behavior. So as a result, reported hate crimes in the U.S. have increased by about 100% since 2015, reaching record highs, according to USA Facts and the Department of Justice, with the most significant increases in anti-Black, anti-Jewish, and anti-LGBTQ plus incidents. Now, I must confess, I have struggled all my life to understand hate. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not denying it. I know it exists, as I've personally been the recipient of hateful words and actions. Now, what I struggle with is, what does hate get you? How does it make things better for you? I mean, it's impractical. And worse, we know it's bad for your health. And that's because the hate emotion, triggers chronic stress, flooding your body with hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, leading to inflammation, high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, weakened immunity, and increased risk for heart disease, impacting your nervous, endocrine, and immune systems. Hate literally can shorten your life, if not outright kill you. Hate is driven by ignorance, insecurity, fear, anger, and social conditioning, meaning hate is a learned behavior. So, is there anything we can do about it? Or is this just our new reality? Well, I believe there are very few things in this world that are irreversible. I believe the hateful environment can be toned down and diffused. Not eliminated, but made less toxic. How? Well, as I just mentioned, hate is a learned behavior. So here are a couple of ways we can address this. First, communication and tone. Now, I believe the president has the greatest opportunity in diffusing the hateful climate. He could choose to speak in tones of calmness, collaboration, and respect. Others would follow his lead. Now, I know a lot of you are immediately thinking, well, we're doomed because he's incapable of making such a dramatic turn. I agree. It's hard to imagine he would make such a pivot, especially given his horrific comments in response to the Rob Reiner murder. I mean, these comments were widely rebuked, even by Fox News. But when challenged on it, when given the chance to revise his comments, he doubled down. But what about the other 535 members of Congress and the Senate? They're not required to conduct themselves in the same manner as the president. Where are their personal values? What's keeping them from behaving better and treating people with dignity and respect, even when in disagreement? Well, one key reason is that fear and hate are great motivators for voters. It is so much easier for a politician to tell you, hey, vote for me and I'll keep those other people down, versus vote for me and let me tell you my plan for how I'm going to help improve your life. As I said in episode 1 of The Ruthless Truth, fear is the most powerful human emotion. But let's call them out on it and tell them we don't like it and we won't tolerate it. Let's remind them that they are national figures and role models, and that please don't model behavior that I never want to see in my kids. Okay, the second improvement opportunity is in information. I mentioned one of the driving factors of hate is ignorance. Well, ignorance is an impediment to empathy. And empathy is the ability to see a situation or conditions through the eyes of others. It's harder to hate someone when you have familiarity, understanding, or concern of their issues. But this requires a willingness to learn. And unfortunately, the current news mediascape allows people to easily stay in a bubble and only hear news that aligns with their beliefs. But I'm saying let's make an effort to expand our sources of information. As difficult as it sometimes is, I make a point to listen to various media reports across the political spectrum. It doesn't often change my opinion, but occasionally provides me perspective requiring some consideration. This allows for the more reasonable response of, I understand. I just disagree. Okay, let's get to today's truth. Today's truth. Have you ever heard the expression, failure is the mother of success? Well, it's actually an ancient Chinese proverb, and it is as true today as it was when first written many centuries ago. So in today's truth, I want to talk about the importance of failure on the road to success. Failure is going to happen. Everyone experiences it. What separates the winners from the losers, the successful folks from those who never achieve their goals, is how they handle failure. Okay, the first step in failure is actually trying something, taking a shot. You can't fail at something if you never even try. And there are some people who haven't really experienced failure because they've never taken a risk, mostly out of fear of failure. And let me say this now, if you don't take anything else away from this discussion, please understand this. Fear of failure has led to more missed opportunities for greatness than anything else. I say reject fear of failure. And if you're struggling with getting there, then ask the question I always ask myself. What's the worst thing that could happen? Now, I understand the fear. Failure sucks. And depending on the situation, it can be emotionally debilitating. It can rack your confidence. And it will take some time to recover and regroup. But if you know that going in, it makes it a little easier to get through it. Let's look at a few scenarios. In episode 19, I talked about the dating crisis in America. And while there are many factors, one of the leading factors is this. Approximately 45% of men aged 18 to 25 have never approached a woman in person. Never. And why? Fear of rejection. How many guys missed a chance at finding their prize and soulmate because they didn't even try? Back to my question, what's the worst thing that could happen? She could say no. And depending on the location of the scenario, the two of you are probably the only people who know she said no. But the upside, a chance to find love and happiness, to me, that seems worth the risk. I've been asked more times than I could count, what have been the keys to your success? Well, of course, there were many factors, including education, training, mentorship, planning, goal setting. But no question, one of the greatest factors was a willingness to try something new, to change jobs, to relocate to a new and unfamiliar city. And if I took a risk, that meant my entire family had to take that risk. Fortunately for me, my wife was always a supporting force. She would always say, "You got this job, you can get another one." So what do I consider to be my greatest failure? Well, I can only think of one instance where I really, really wanted to get a job and I didn't get it. I once interviewed at Microsoft to be the CMO of MFN, which was the web portal and internet service owned by Microsoft. This would be a new position for the company, and I really wanted it. Not just because it would represent a significant increase in compensation, but I was ready to change industries from wireless. And the interviewing was extensive. I interviewed with at least 13 people, including Steve Ballmer. But alas, I didn't get it. I wasn't devastated, but it was definitely extremely disappointing. But sometimes opportunities quickly follow failure. A month later, I was contacted about the CMO position at Comcast, which turned out to be one of the best career moves I've ever made. And that role at MFN that I didn't get, well, 1 month after it was filled, the hiring executive left the company. And 6 months later, there was a reorganization and the position was eliminated. So the failure ended up being a blessing. So again, factor one is just trying. Okay, what's the second element of overcoming failure? Okay. What do you do when you fail? What are the keys to regrouping? Well, first, give yourself a minute. Take however much time you need to move past the emotional impact, because emotion is powerful and at times can be blinding or even debilitating. It's definitely difficult to make good decisions going forward when you're in an emotional state. But once you get straight, you need to do some analysis and ask some questions. Like, why was I unsuccessful? What went wrong? Relook at your going in assumptions. What did you miss? What information or perspective did you not have that you now know you needed? And if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? For the entirety of my career, I emphasize to my team that mistakes are a learning opportunity. And the evidence of learning is that the mistake is not repeated. Ideally, you work in a culture that believes mistakes are expected and an opportunity to learn. And if you yourself are in a position to drive or influence the culture, then make this a priority. I also encourage you to make this a point of emphasis with your children. Challenge them to challenge themselves, but make sure they know that if they stumble or fail, there are no penalties or repercussions for trying. If she wants to cheer, support her for trying out for the cheerleading team. And when looking at college options, you'll never get into the college that you don't apply to. Again, what's the worst that can happen? So, step one, give it a try. Step two, if you fail, try to understand what happened and make sure you learned everything you can from the mistake. So what's step three? Well, step three is keep trying. Don't let one failure or a few failures lead you to giving up and no longer trying. Some of the most successful people in history experience multiple failures before they broke through and achieved success. Here are just a few. Stephen King, one of his most successful books was Carrie, but Carrie was rejected over 30 times before it was published. Colonel Sanders' special recipe for Kentucky Fried Chicken was rejected over 1,000 times before the first restaurant accepted it. At age 22, Oprah Winfrey was fired from her job as a reporter because the station believed she was, quote, unfit for TV. And finally, there's J.K. Rowling. She was divorced, unemployed, and on welfare when she was rejected by 12 publishers before one finally agreed to publish her first Harry Potter book. Okay, So to summarize, failure is almost always a key component on the road to success. How you react and respond to failure will dictate whether success is ultimately achieved. And remember the process. First, you have to try to succeed or accomplish something. Second, when you fail, reflect and strive to understand why you were unsuccessful and make sure you learn something from the experience that will increase your future odds of success. And third, keep trying. Keep trying until you achieve success. Overcoming failure builds patience, perseverance, and character, making success all the more meaningful. And I'll end this discussion with one of my favorite quotes, often attributed to Nelson Mandela. I never lose. I either win or I learn. Okay, let's get to today's American history fun fact. Today's American history fun fact. Whenever there is a discussion about the pioneers of rock and roll, you often hear the same list of famous names. But before Elvis Presley and Little Richard or Carl Perkins, before Jerry Lee Lewis, and even before Chuck Berry, there was Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the godmother of rock and roll. Many rock historians view Chuck Berry as one of the very first rockers, who was cited as an influence by many legendary rock bands. But Chuck Berry himself once famously said his entire career was, quote, one long Sister Rosetta Tharpe impression. Okay, so here's her story. Rosetta Tharpe was born on March 20th, 1915 as Rosetta Newben in Cotton Plant, Arkansas, to Kate Bell Newben and Willis Atkins, and her parents were cotton pickers. Now, there's not much information on her father, but her mother was a singer, a mandolin player, and a passionate member and speaker for the Church of God in Christ. In 1921, at age 6, Rosetta joined her mother as a performer in a traveling evangelical tour. And with her singing and guitar playing, Rosetta was seen as a musical child prodigy. In 1934, at age 19, Rosetta married Thomas Thorpe, a Kojic, Church of God in Christ, minister who had traveled in the same group as Rosetta and her mother. So Rosetta took the last name and Thorpe, which was a slight revision of her married name, Thorpe. Now, the marriage only lasted a few years, and although she married several times afterwards, she performed as Rosetta Tharpe for her entire career. Her professional music career began in 1938 at age 23 when she recorded her first gospel song entitled Rock Me, plus 3 other songs. All 4 recordings became instant hits. Then in 1941, Rosetta signed a 10-year deal with Lucky Millendar Swing Band and Tour. So Rosetta continued to record, but her songs were controversial. Many churchgoers were shocked by the mixture of gospel-based lyrics and secular-sounding music, but the secular audiences, they loved it. Tharpe also on several occasions performed with the white gospel group, the Jordanaires. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, it should. The Jordanaires later went on to be the most frequent backup singers for Elvis Presley. Now, the Black community just didn't know what to think of Rosetta or what to do with her. Performing gospel music for secular nightclub audiences and alongside blues and jazz musicians and dancers was unusual. And in conservative religious circles, a woman playing the guitar in such settings was frowned upon. You got to remember, this was the 1940s. So as a result, Tharpe fell out of favor with segments of the gospel community. So Rosetta struggled to find her place. She considered rebuilding a strictly gospel act, but she was still contractually required to perform more worldly material. Her song, Strange Things Happening Every Day, recorded in 1944, is widely considered as the first rock and roll record. In 1947, Rosetta teamed up with Marie Knight, a talented vocalist, and the two toured together for the remainder of the decade. But by the early 1950s, Marie broke off to pursue a solo career. Mahalia Jackson had eclipsed Rosetta as a gospel performer, and Tharp's popularity began to fade. She did have a hit in 1952 with Red Foley and their song, Have a Little Talk with Jesus, which is likely the first interracial duet ever recorded. Even so, Rosetta Tharp's popularity continued to fade in the 1950s, although she had a brief career revival with a European tour in 1964. You can actually see clips of that on YouTube. By the late 1960s, she was mostly out of the music scene, and in 1973, she died of a stroke at the age of 58. So, although Rosetta Tharp is mostly unknown, even to many music enthusiasts, her impact and legacy is intact and undisputed. Tharp's guitar style blended melody-driven urban blues with traditional folk arrangements and incorporated a pulsating swing that was the precursor of rock and roll. When Johnny Cash gave his induction speech at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he referred to Tharp as his favorite singer when he was a child. Tharp began recording with the electric guitar in the 1940s with That's All, which has been cited as an influence on Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley. In 2023, Rolling Stone named Rosetta Tharp the sixth greatest guitarist of all time. And in September 2025, Tharp was selected for induction into the National Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. Okay, that's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Thank you so much for listening. Again, follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ruthless Truth. And there's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. Thanks again, and I will talk to all of you soon.